And I want to welcome everybody to our interesting program sponsored by the Anthracite Heritage Museum in Scranton. And before we get started, I want to announce that on April 30th, the Anthracite Heritage Museum, along with all of the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission sites, will reopen. For the first couple of months, we'll be open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with limited programming, but be sure to check out our website and Facebook pages after Tuesday when they're updated for more details and information about reopening and returning to the museum. So we hope to see you all soon. So welcome again, good afternoon and good evening to everyone. I am Bodie Morin. I am the site administrator of the Anthracite Heritage Museum, and we're real pleased to have a really terrific panel with us today to help talk about some of our Irish and Welsh roots. March is an important month for the communities that came to this region to work in the anthracite coal industry. March 1st is, of course, St. David's Day, the Welsh holiday, and March 17th is St. Patrick's Day, the Irish holiday. The Welsh and the Irish were some of the earliest immigrant groups to come to Northeast Pennsylvania to work in our industry, and they've had a lasting impact and impression on our community. So we're really thrilled to have this very exciting program today. And one quick note, we will have an opportunity for questions and answers. If you scroll down to the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A button that you can press, and you could write in your question there. We will probably hold off on responding to all the questions until both speakers have talked. But otherwise, feel free to engage with us, and also feel free to shoot me an email, although I will probably turn my email off because it dings every time I get a new one. So without further ado, I will turn it over to John Fielding, who is the curator at the Anthracite Heritage Museum and Eckley Miners Village. So John.
Oh, thank you, Bodie. So thank you everybody for attending today. And as Bodie said, we have two speakers today. Our first speaker will be Dr. Bill Jones, and our second speaker will be Dr. Deirdre Ní Chonaill. If I think I pronounced that correctly, Deirdre. If I didn't, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But so Dr. Jones, he's going to go first. He's and his presentation is called Mór Ogan, or A Sea of Song, and it's Welsh choral and communal singing in the Anthracite region in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, Bill Jones is an emeritus professor of Welsh history at Cardiff University, Wales, where he taught modern Welsh history in Welsh and English. His main research interest is the history of the Welsh overseas in the 19th and early 20th centuries. He has published extensively on the Welsh in the United States, including Wales in America, Scranton and the Welsh, 1860 to 1920, and Welsh Reflections, Edrych and America, 1851 to 2001. He has delivered presentations in the United States many times during the past 40 years, the most recent being in 2019 at the North American Festival of Wales in Milwaukee, and 150th anniversary commemoration of the Avondale mine disaster. Our second presenter, Dr. Deirdre Ní Chonaill, will present the Reverend Daniel J. Murphy Archive, Irish Sean Nos singers in 19th century Pennsylvania. Deirdre is a musician, broadcaster, writer, and curator from the Aran Islands. She has is the co-coordinator of the ongoing community-based project Amhran Aran, or Aran Songs. She was previously NUI postdoctoral fellow in Irish Celtic Studies and Irish Research Council postdoctoral fellow at NUI Galway. And she was an Alan Lomax Fellow at the Library of Congress and NEH Keogh Fellow at the University of Notre Dame. Her research interests include the untold story of the cultural lives of Irish-speaking immigrants in 19th and 20th century North America, and the potential of digital humanities to enable creative access to the rich archive of Irish music and folkloric material that survives on both sides of the Atlantic. As a consultant, she has served Harvard University, the Library of Congress, English National Opera, Druid Theatre Company, and the Irish American Climate Project, among others. So without further ado, I will turn over to Bill, Dr. Jones, and thank you.
Yeah, John, thank you. I'm just going to put the PowerPoint up. Right. Prynawn da I chi gyd, a diolch o galon am y gwahoddiad I siarad heddiw. Mae'n braf bod gyda chi. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to Bodie and John for organising this event and for inviting me to contribute to it. I'm delighted to be here, and it's always a pleasure to work with the Pennsylvania Anthracite Museum. I've chosen to speak on this topic because when I was doing the research for my PhD on the Welsh in Scranton in the late 19th and early 20th century, and that's many decades ago now, I remember being constantly amazed and even thrilled by the scale, energy, enthusiasm, passion, and importance of Welsh musical activity in the Anthracite region. And it's continued to fascinate me ever since. And I confess I've also chosen this topic because, like some of you who are listening perhaps, it kind of reminds me of what I've been missing by not being able to sing in choir rehearsals and performances for over a year because of the COVID crisis. Now, in this presentation, I'll talk very generally about some aspects of the history of Welsh choirs and communal singing in the Anthracite region during the period when the Welsh ethnic experience there was at its most intense. Now, it's a large topic, so I can only hope to offer glimpses of such a wonderful heritage. And although I'm talking about the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it's important to point out that this Welsh tradition is still evident today. For example, as shown by the St David's Welsh male chorus, the Cymanfa Ganu at the First United Methodist Church in Carbondale, people from the region being members of Cor Cymru Gogledd America, the North American Welsh Choir, and the holding of the National Welsh Cymanfa Ganu, now called the North American Festival of Wales, in Wilkes-Barre in 1983, and again in 1993, and in Scranton in 2012. It's revealing that contemporaries over 100 years ago frequently described Welsh ethnic life in the Anthracite region as Môr o Gân, a sea of song, because of the scale and vibrancy of its choral and communal singing. The ancient motto, Môr o Gân yw Cymru I gyd, all of Wales is a sea of song, was used almost ubiquitously in the homeland in the late 19th century, and it travelled across the Atlantic. Fe ddywedir mai Môr o Gân yw Cymru I gyd. It is said that all of Wales is a sea of song, wrote a Welsh resident in Edwardsville in a letter to the Welsh language American newspaper Drych, the Mirror, in 1893. But he continued, and I've translated, but on coming to America, the Welsh do not lose the musical fire that characterizes their nation. 2 years earlier, a Wyoming Valley correspondent of the same newspaper wrote, "We heard since from a young age that all Wales is a sea of song, a gellir dweud hynny am y dyffryn hwn hefyd," and we could say that about this valley too. And here is another usage. Apologies for whatever bit off the corner there of the newspaper. Here's the banner motto on the poster, Môr o Gân yw Cymru I gyd, on the poster of the 1907 Welsh Day in Scranton, which was attended by an estimated 25,000 people. Welsh Days were very popular events in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, and they offered a wide variety of activities and attractions, the most important of them being singing. They included choral contests and concert performances by combined mass choirs and soloists, intermingled with community singing of Welsh hymns and melodies and American patriotic songs. Just going to go back to the title slide. The scale and intensity of the Welsh world of song in the Anthracite region is not surprising, considering the unparalleled size and cultural strength of the Welsh presence there. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the region contained the largest concentration of Welsh people in America. As is well known, Lackawanna and Luzerne counties are the historical heartlands of the Welsh immigrant presence in the United States. Remarkably, by 1900, when the number of Welsh immigrants and their American-born children reached its peak, 21,000 Welsh immigrants and their American-born children lived in Luzerne County and around 19,000 in Lackawanna County, making a total of 41,000 first and second generation. This isn't generation Welsh. This isn't far off 20% of the total 267,000 first and second generation Welsh living in the States as a whole in that year. And there were, of course, significant numbers of Welsh immigrants in other parts of the Anthracite region too. In 1900, Schuylkill was the county with the 5th largest number of Welsh in the USA, with a total of over 5,000 first and second generation Welsh. The immigrants brought with them from Wales their native language and many social, cultural, industrial, musical, and religious traditions that were transplanted and flourished in the region, and also greatly influenced the communities in which the Welsh settled. Singing is one of the most widely known and enduring of these traditions. Many commentators believe that it was in their singing that the Welsh made the greatest impact on host societies in the areas where they settled worldwide. Around the time that Welsh immigrants were beginning to flock into the Anthracite region in greater numbers from the 1850s onwards, they had been coming earlier than that, of course, but when they're flocking in greater numbers, there were occurring in Wales crucially important and influential developments in the spheres of music and especially singing that shaped the cultural components the Welsh brought with them. From around 1870 to 1920, choral singing as a characteristically Welsh activity reached its golden age. Rooted in a tradition of popular music making stretching back for centuries, it emerged in its familiar form from the interaction of Protestant nonconformity, of temperance, of industrial growth, and crucially the tonic solfa movement, which revolutionized music making by teaching thousands to read musical notes. The number of eisteddfodau and choral competitions in Wales multiplied, while choral singing enjoyed a great surge in secular popularity. Immigration brought to the Anthracite region some very talented Welsh singers, in some cases whole families of them. It brought many more Welsh who were competent at singing, and no doubt even more who loved to listen to it and who would become devoted and often fanatic supporters of a particular choir or choirs in the new country. Musical skill, as well as iron making or coal mining skill, could be advantageous for newly arrived Welsh male migrants. According to a history of the Welsh in Scranton in 1902, and I've translated from the original Welsh, when a singer came to Scranton, those who were fond of music or friends of those who were would make every attempt to secure work for him. Singing was a key element of Welsh ethnic identity. It was tremendously popular among both participants and spectators, and the Welsh took their singing and their often fierce choral rivalry very seriously. Singing pervaded the social and cultural activities of the Welsh and of the ethnic institutions and societies they established in the Anthracite region, as elsewhere in the USA. Notable here were the Welsh churches, the Eisteddfod, plural eisteddfodau, the literary and musical competitive festival, and later the Cymanfa Ganu, the hymn singing festival. And I'll say a bit more about each of these later in the presentation. Welsh singing could be heard in a host of formal and informal settings. Even the Welsh drunkards along Hyde Park's main avenue in Scranton apparently always sang in their native tongue. We know too that a great deal of privately organized communal singing went on in the homes of Welsh families. And to take another example, From the late 1860s, we have newspaper reports of funerals when impromptu choirs formed to sing Welsh hymns to accompany the deceased to the place of burial. Welsh congregations in the Anthracite region soon earned a reputation for excellent singing and for their ability for part singing, for singing in 4-part harmony or other number of parts. And the fact that they sang in harmony was often very soon noticed with surprise by non-Welsh listeners and was commented upon. And indeed, it's high time to hear some singing. Another key aspect of the development of congregational music making in the 19th century that reproduced in America was the centrality of the hymn and its emergence in the words of one scholar, a social phenomenon significant beyond the walls of places of worship. In whatsoever country or continent the Welsh gathered, the quote continues, the singing of hymns became a collective expression of their identity as a people. Now, the hymn I'm going to play is Cwm Rhondda, perhaps the most powerful and popular of Welsh hymn tunes. It was composed in 1907, which meant that it didn't really reach the USA until the end of the first decade of the 20th century. But we could say that once it arrived, it made up for lost time very quickly, and it was almost sung everywhere and every place. I'm going to play it with the Welsh words, Welyn sefyll rhwng y myrtwydd, low amid the myrtles standing. And there are 2 sound clips here. First of all, we're going to hear, and I like this one, which is why I've chosen it. I like both of them, which is why I've chosen them. They're personal choices. This is the Borough Welsh Chapel Choir in London, who won the National Eisteddfod in Liverpool in 1929. And they released a number of records, and this is dating from 1958. So I'm going to start off with the first verse of the Borough Choir, and then we'll move on to another bunch of singers. Feel free to sing along.
Bill, that cut off about halfway through.
And it continues with the last verse sung with a few more people. This is a remarkable event in 1963 when 5,000 gathered for a Cymanfa Ganu in the Royal Albert Hall in London. I love this record. It is on YouTube. It was never made into a CD, unfortunately, but it is on YouTube, as indeed was the other one. This is the 5,000 Voices a Nation Sings. I like it particularly because I grew up with this one, hearing it often at home, because my parents had a copy of it. So we'll continue with Cwm Rhondda, for the last verse. Now you begin to wonder whether we're actually ever going to stop. The repeat of the chorus at the end of the hymn was traditional and is still standard practice, although there's a double repeat there. The masters of ceremonies or the compares of eisteddfodau in the late 19th century anywhere in the world needed to be very careful that they didn't start impromptu singing in between the competitions of eisteddfodau. Otherwise, they would be there for hours until finally the singing of the hymns stopped. The Welsh churches in the Anthracite region were important institutions that developed and nurtured Welsh singing. The Welsh nonconformist Protestant denominations, the Baptists, the Calvinistic Methodists, and the Independents or Congregationalists put down strong roots in the Anthracite region, and especially so in the northern coalfield. Scores of Welsh churches were established and built. Initially, the language of the church life was Welsh. Religion played a crucial role in the lives of many Welsh immigrants, not just because of their faith, but also because, like their counterparts in the homeland, churches were also social, cultural, and recreational centres. The Welsh nonconformist denominations placed great emphasis on hymn singing in worship, regarding it as being essential to the cultural as well as the spiritual aspects of religious life. The Welsh churches held classes to improve congregational singing, known as the Ysgol Gân, the singing school, and organised eisteddfodau, while church choirs, both children's and senior, gave frequent performances. And this is the Welsh Baptist Church in Hyde Park on South Main Avenue, not the one that's there now, this one burnt down. The Welsh Baptist Church in Hyde Park had very accomplished and respected choir, and among other things, pioneered performances of oratorios in Scranton in the late 1880s and early 1890s. As I've already mentioned, the reputation of Anthracite Region Welsh choirs for fine musical performance and excellence was nationally acknowledged and often elicited favourable comparison with the best choral societies in the largest cities in the country. The quality of Welsh musical endeavour and successes of competitions of wholly or predominantly Welsh choirs made an immense contribution to the region's prestigious choral heritage and to civic pride in its communities. The Welsh contingents in the various cities and towns bred great choirs in all three choral categories, mixed male and ladies, and bred many great conductors, mostly male, but some female, who were responsible for organising, training, and conducting these choirs. There were also composers, as many of you will know, perhaps the most famous of them all, William Gwent, William Aubrey Williams, who lived in Plymouth, who emigrated to Plymouth. Here he is on the left, and then here his grave in the Hollenbach Cemetery in Wilkesbury. And those of you with better eyesight than me may see that actually inscribed under his name and details are the first bars of his very famous ode, Yr Haf, the summer. The famous composers Daniel Prothero and Joseph Parry also worked for times in the Anthracite region as well. Some Welsh conductors led their Welsh choirs to a series of stunning victories, not just within the region itself, but elsewhere in the USA and even in Wales itself. Sublime singing by the Anthracite Male Choir of Scranton, according to the Druid, the Welsh American English language newspaper published in Pittsburgh. This was Luther Bassett's Anthracite Male Chorus, winning first prize in the second male voice competition at the National Eisteddfod of Wales held in Treorchy in the Rhondda Valley in August 1928, and one of the rare occasions when a choir from America won a choral competition in the homeland. Triumphs like these live long in public memory. Now, there are far too many choirs, conductors, and stunning achievements to mention them all, so just a couple of examples. First, the celebrated victory of the Scranton Choral Union in the Great World's Fair Eisteddfod at Chicago in 1893, led by Hayden Evans in the centre there. The Scranton Choral Union also included members of two Wilkesbury choirs, the Sicilians female choir, led by Mrs. Annie Thomas, and the Dr. Mason male choir. The Scranton Choral Union had been organised by John T. Watkins, who would soon become one of the most acclaimed and beloved conductors in the Lackawanna Valley, and who achieved an international reputation. And on my left, there, on our left, is Jerry Costello's portrait of Watkins that appeared in the Scranton Republican in 1918. And on the right, an absolutely wonderful cartoon from Steinker's Story of Scranton and Vicinity in Cartoons of 1914. And there is, in the book itself, there is a text under the cartoon, and one of the sentences in it, it is said of Watkins that if there is music in a person, he will bring it out, which is surely the best compliment that any conductor or any music teacher could have. The cartoon shows a list of choirs that he conducted. You'll notice the Younger Manor Choir, the German choir, as well as some of the non-Welsh church choirs in Scranton, and some of his many eisteddfodic and other contest victories there. And just to name just two, the St. Louis World's Fair Choral Contest in 1904, and at the Pittsburgh International Eisteddfod in 1903. I wish I'd have time to say a lot more about John T. Watkins, because he's a fascinating figure, but I don't. As I suggested earlier, there was more to singing than eisteddfodau, but nevertheless, this Welsh cultural institution was the most obvious and accessible outlet for choral activity and for spectators during the period I'm talking about. Eisteddfodau were markedly popular and frequent, and they fulfilled a number of roles in the music life of the Welsh community. They were important in developing and nurturing local literary and musical talent, and many of the region's early Welsh choirs were organised specifically to compete in eisteddfodau. According to the Wilkesbury-born historian Edward Hartman, in his classic work Americans from Wales, Pennsylvania anthracite communities, I quote, were particularly eisteddfod-minded. The Lackawanna Valley occupies, of course, a pioneering position in the Welsh-American eisteddfodic tradition, because the first recorded eisteddfod in the USA was that held in Carbondale on Christmas Day 1850, and Welsh churches in Pittston held similar events in the same decade. The eisteddfod quickly took root in the new Welsh settlements, and important eisteddfodau were held during the course of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, often annually in Scranton, Wilkesbury, Pittston, Plymouth, Nanticoke, Edwardsville, Pottsville, Shenandoah, Shamokin, Mahonai City, Minersville, as well as in numerous smaller communities. And as some sort of illustrations of that, from Drych, the Welsh language, Welsh American newspaper, 11th of February, 1886. Yes, and I couldn't resist leaving in the adverts for the electric curler and the electric toothbrush, just in case there were potential buyers out there among you. Here we have adverts for two eisteddfodau, organised by well-known and successful choirs for the purposes of raising funds, largely to subsidise their entering competitions in locations away from their native communities. These were the Eisteddfod Gerddorol, a musical Eisteddfod in the skating rink in Plymouth, under the auspices of the Colquitt Glee Society, another well-known choir of the late 19th centuries, on Decoration Day, and at Mears Hall in Hyde Park, the Welsh section of Scranton on the west side, on St. David's Day, 1886, and this one organised by the Pennsylvania Glean Club. And two more examples from Wilkesbury, the Daily Record of the Times newspaper, the first on the left, the 5th of January, 1875, and the second, the 20th of February, of the Wilkesbury Eisteddfod held on St. Patrick's Day. Held on St. Patrick's Day, of course, because the mines were closed, because of St. Patrick's Day and Irish going to work. So these were ideal times for the Welsh and indeed other ethnic groups to hold their own cultural events. I've chosen this one particularly because there is a paragraph at the bottom of this second one, which explains that they've had to shift the venue from the music hall to the market house, because the market house had enough space to accommodate 3,500. And yes, they succeeded in filling it. And also, if you see from the types of music there, the predominance of oratorio works and occasionally of works by local Welsh composers. There is a Clychau, the bells, one of Gwilym Gwent's work included there, much less of Welsh folk music. And this was true of in Wales as well, as particularly in South Wales. Now, some of these very larger eisteddfodau were very grand and prestigious affairs, held over 2 or more days, while generally eisteddfodau drew large audiences, attracted great interest, and generated a fair amount of excitement. Their proceedings were extensively reported in the local press and in Welsh and English language newspapers and periodicals that served the Welsh ethnic group in America. Larger eisteddfodau attracted attention from further afield, as the presence of the Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper monthly artist Joseph Becker here at the 1880 National Eisteddfod in Scranton, held on the 23rd and 24th of June 1880. It's a wonderful and a very valuable illustration, and naturally showing a choir, as the choral contests were regarded as the high point of these eisteddfod. This particular eisteddfod took place in a beautifully draped, specially erected temporary building in Hyde Park, capable of holding 10,000 people. It was full to capacity on the afternoon and evening sessions of both days, including large attendances from Wilkes-Barre, Plymouth, and other centres in the Wyoming and Lackawanna valleys and further afield. Some measure of the prestigious nature of the event is that it was attended by Governor Hoyt of Pennsylvania, ex-Pennsylvania Governor Hart Anft, Terence Powderly, Mayor of Scranton, Samuel Sloan, President of the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western Railroad Company. Adjudicators included, for the musical contests, Dudley Buck, the celebrated composer, and this illustrates a trend in the larger eisteddfodau as the 19th century wore on, to often invite renowned musicians from outside the Anthracite region. Buck was overwhelmed by the quality of the singing and the choral competitions. As in the homeland, non-Welsh adjudicators consistently marvelled at the standard of Welsh choirs, that the standard Welsh choirs could attain, even though they were amateur and often taught and led by non-professionals. And for the most part, their members were drawn from the working class. Throughout the late 19th and into the 20th centuries, the eisteddfod continued to play a major part in the cultural life of the Welsh communities in the Anthracite region, while singing increased, if anything, in importance and popularity. Large-scale prestigious eisteddfodau continued to be held, whilst at a local level, annual events sponsored by the various Welsh societies dominated the calendar of Welsh cultural activities. At the same time, under the impact of the acculturation and Americanization of the Welsh, usage of the Welsh language waned, and the eisteddfod became primarily an English language cosmopolitan musical festival. The status of literary competitions declined, while conversely, musical and particularly choral competitions became its primary function. Increasingly, many of the eisteddfodau held in the Anthracite region from the 1880s onwards were purely musical in nature, and we've seen some examples of these already. These musical eisteddfodau often included competitions for choirs from other nationalities, Irish Catholic choirs, German choirs. Even in 1926, a Polish eisteddfod was held in Scranton. Yet the days of the eisteddfod were numbered. By the 1920s, it had been replaced as the premier Welsh cultural institution in the Anthracite region by the Cymanfa Ganu, as we saw singing or hymn singing festival, which had gained tremendous popularity and importance rapidly during the first decades of the 20th century in Welsh communities all over the United States. The development of the Cymanfa Ganu to become the chief festival of the Welsh in North America needs a presentation all of its own to do it justice, and I'm oversimplifying a great deal here. But it's worth mentioning, in drawing to a close, that love of communal hymn singing is central to these events. And some commentators have emphasised also the role of Welsh hymn singing in maintaining an active presence for the Welsh language through providing an opportunity to Americans of Welsh descent who are not fluent in Welsh but can still sing in the Welsh language. I've had to gloss over and omit many things in this presentation, but I hope I've been able to convey something of the rich choral and communal singing heritage of the Anthracite region. But I don't want to end this presentation with my words, but with some music, which I think encapsulates the various characteristics and the essence of Welsh hymn singing and the thrill of hearing it sung with gusto. And we're back to the Albert Hall in 1863 and to the last verse of the hymn tune Sanctus, one of my all-time favourites, the words Glân Gerubiaid a Seraphiaid, but we'll hear the third and final verse.
Yeah, Bill, we seem to be having some technical difficulties and we're not able to hear the recording. I don't know if there's a way to adjust the sound. And we did have a request. See, maybe if we're having some problems with the sound, if you could share the links to the YouTube links to the recordings.
Can't follow that. Thank you very much for listening. Diolch yn fawr iawn am wrando.
Oops.
Okay, I guess it's over to me then, Bill, I think. Thank you very much, Bill, for a fascinating insight into the world of Welsh music making in Pennsylvania during the same time period that I'm going to be talking about. And John valiantly tried to pronounce my name earlier, and I promise you he got it right in the rehearsal. So my name is Deirdre Nichanela. And I'm going to be speaking about the Irish experience, but if you'll bear with me for a second, I will try to share my screen to show you my slides. There we go. So I'm absolutely delighted to have this invitation to present to all of you today, especially to link in with the Anthracite Heritage Museum in Scranton and with the wider community in Pennsylvania. So thank you to John and Bodie for organising everything, and delighted to share the stage with Bill too. So I'm going to be talking about the archive of the Reverend Daniel J. Murphy, but I'll give you some background first and also introduce myself as a musician and a scholar, as John mentioned earlier. I play the fiddle and I research Irish traditional music. So those two things inform each other. And for many years now, I've been examining the practice of collecting or documenting music. And you'll have some sense maybe of the work involved in trying to trace music from the evidence that Bill shared with you there. I'm publishing a book, it's out in July, on the practice of music collecting in Ireland. And all of the examples are from the Aran Islands, my own home. But just to highlight the core challenge of that practice of documenting music is the fact that it's essentially ephemeral. You can't pin it down, you can't grasp the wind, as one writer put it. And before recording technology, we're relying on literacy. And we saw lots of examples in Bill's presentation there of material in print, also the beautiful illustrations, but also manuscripts would have been used before people had access to print. So it's important, I think, to bear in mind that the reality of media when we're trying to trace music and music activity. And the question also applies to the Irish language as well, because it has a very different history to the Welsh language in its relation with literacy. So it can be a challenge to find Irish language source material in the first place. So just to show you here, this is an example of a manuscript in the National Library in Dublin. And it's actually a submission from J.J. Lyons, who's a collaborator of Father Murphy in Pennsylvania. And he's describing some of the singing activity that's happening in Philadelphia. So he's contributing this song to a publisher in Ireland, in Tuam, as happens. And he's saying the following song is very popular among the natives of Ulster in America. This is written in 1891. And he says, I often heard it sung at weddings and christenings and other social gatherings in the city of Philadelphia. And it's written from the dictation of Con MacNeilis from Inishkeel in County Donegal. So this I wanted to show you because I think that difference is really significant. It's stemming from the fact that this music practice really is primarily an oral one at this time, and it still is even to this day. And also you may see from the writing there that there's a different orthography, because the Irish language uses a Gaelic script. So some of the letters are maybe similar to the Roman alphabet, but some of them are quite different. So this is yet again another challenge for anybody looking at accessing Irish language material. This, just to explain what you're looking at there, this is a letter that Father Murphy was writing on his own Gaelic script typewriter. He was one of the earliest people to own one of those, which were produced, manufactured in America. And also another interesting fun fact is that the typeface for Gaelic script, the first time that it was cast was in a Boston foundry, and that was paid for by Irish immigrants in America. So this is a sort of useful background, as I say, and the song tradition isn't just an oral one primarily, it's also a solo tradition. So we've been listening to the wealth of choral music, but this is the other end of the spectrum entirely. So maybe not quite so spectacular, but very compelling in its intimacy in a way. So just to share a photograph from a local singer to me, would say now passed on, of course, Pat Vadio here and now and there, but you have a sense maybe of his pride in his own performance in that picture. So if you're trying to trace material to track the history of this particular tradition, the question is, how are you going to find them, given that they're so difficult to trace? These communities in the 19th century in Ireland, they did not tend to have literacy in the Irish language. The Irish language wasn't taught on the school curriculum formally until 1904. So for anybody in the 19th century who has literacy in Irish, they really are in the minority. They're exceptional. So all of these are significant challenges if you're trying to trace this history. So just to show you an example, this is an image of music collectors. So these are people who are deliberately going out to document music. And so for me, the starting point to tracing examples of music documents from that time is going to be relying on the activities of people like these. So this is an image of Cecil Sharp and Maud Carpleys, who were English collectors of music. That photo taken in Kentucky. And this image is demonstrating a number of things. firstly, of course, is you can imagine the effort that's involved in having to transcribe each verse, and Cecil here is probably transcribing the melody as well. But also just that notion of when they were capturing music, this was music that was crossing distances of time and also of space. So the diaspora and the diasporic experience presents another variety of threshold that's being negotiated. And the spirit of this practice and also of, I mean, both practices in the sense of trying to document it, but also the performance of it is captured in a poem by Moya Cannon, an Irish poet. Her poem is called Carrying the Songs. And there's a line in it where she says, "Songs were their soul's currency, the pure metal of their hearts." And she's describing the experience of migrants moving and carrying their songs with them. So we know, as Bill has demonstrated there in respect of the Welsh, that songs and singing helped the diaspora to counter the effects of displacement and dispossession. So it was bringing their home with them and enacting it and embodying it each time they were performing it and sharing it with people around them. But there's another aspect of the currency that I think is significant, in that they're finding, depending on the demographics around them, that their songs and their language are potentially minoritized in a way, depending on the other languages and cultures that are around them, and also the politics that are around them as well. So politics is a theme, or identity politics certainly are, because in this period, you've got rising nationalism at home in Ireland, and a lot of the rhetoric of that is occurring in the States as well. And sometimes it's one of the motives that encourages the activities of people who are working with the Irish language and Irish language song in America. And that whole network, they had a name for it among themselves, which was eisteddfod, meaning Big Ireland. So I just thought I should maybe give you some of the individuals that were present in that network. The man to the left here, Michael J. Logan, or Micheál O'Loughlin, is from Galway, and he published a bilingual journal in Brooklyn in New York. And he was publishing it from his home in an effort to keep the costs low so that he could maintain editorial control. And among those that were submitting materials to him for publication were some of these collectors and scribes that you see also on the slide. Micheál O'Loughlin there was based in Wisconsin and Chicago, and generating manuscript material there and transcribing songs. And Pádraig Ferrtéir, whose manuscript collection is here in Ireland and well known, and the main character or individual I'm going to be speaking about today, who is the Reverend Daniel J. Murphy. So the Reverend Murphy, to put his work in a nutshell, it's the largest single collection of song or manuscripts documenting Irish song, whether they're in Irish or in English, but it's the largest one ever to have been created by an independent and non-professional but highly competent and dedicated collector. And I mentioned J.J. Lyons earlier. He was a collaborator with him, and together they produced a collection of over 1,200 sean-nós songs and up to 20 versions of some of those. Now, its lyrics is what they managed to transcribe, because they wouldn't have had the music literacy to capture the melodies to accompany them. However, there was a tradition within the manuscript tradition that was present in the Irish language where a shorthand would be used, and the relevant tune or song air that had been used for the performance would be noted maybe at the top of the page saying Cuishlonny Nail or whichever tune it was. So when we look at the time period this involves, it's from about 1884 right up to the 1920s. And the generations that are included in that, they are famine survivors. So they're bringing their memory with them. So it's the pre-famine memory of Ireland is what's encapsulated in this collection. And I'm sharing with you a rough map that I've generated myself just to get to grips with some of the geographical locations that occur in the manuscript collection. And you'll see that there's both the urban setting in Philadelphia that had a huge number of Irish speakers. In the 1890s, there would have been 400,000 Irish speakers in the whole of the US. That's the estimate that scholars have provided to date. And we know that there would have been 40,000 Irish speakers in Pennsylvania around that time as well. So not an insignificant number, and we know a lot of them coming from Donegal and Mayo. But the occurrence or the production of a collection like this in a diasporic context is significant for one reason in particular, where there's a mix of counties from Ireland, or different regions in Ireland that are represented in the collection. So that mix is unusual. It would have been difficult to achieve that at home in Ireland. So it yields a mix of repertoire, a mix of dialect, and different versions then, of course, of songs. And another interesting aspect of the collection is Father Murphy's position in society as a priest, a position of authority within the community, and it gave him access. So there wouldn't have been any difficulty for him to maybe visit a woman at home alone in her house while her husband was out working, for instance, because of his position. And also maybe the authority that would come with that. It might be difficult to refuse him if he was requesting a song from someone. And another, the most significant aspect of it really is the detail that's given in the manuscript. So for those women, for instance, we're getting their married names and their maiden names, and people are typically identified by their native parishes and even maybe native townlands at home in Ireland. And to get that level of detail from sources of this period is really unusual and extremely valuable then, because we're able to trace the chain migration as it's happening from Ireland over to the US, and give maybe the names that appear in census records and passenger lists to give them some identity and add to that sense of presence for their own lives and stories. So I'd like to share with you this image taken recently of the new headstone for Father Murphy in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And the family have been sharing a lot of information with me about his story and sharing things like this photo as well. But I just thought I'd translate for you the inscription that's on the headstone, where it says "Scolare agus Gael go smir," meaning a scholar and a Gael to the marrow, to his bones. So a nice tribute there to reflect his legacy. So Father Murphy is from Sligo, from the Ox Mountains, which would have been one of the last Irish-speaking areas in Sligo up until the 1950s. There wouldn't be a Gaeltacht community there now. If people are speaking Irish there, it's probably the Irish they've been learning at school. But at the time, it would have been a bilingual community. So he's born in 1858 and emigrates in the mid to early 1880s and is ordained in Philadelphia in 1889. And just to give you an idea of the family, he's one of 10 children. It's a classic Irish story. One inherits the farm. One of them died in mysterious circumstances, and then the other 8 children all emigrated to the US, ending up in Pittsburgh and New Jersey and Philadelphia. So the house that you see there at the bottom of the slide is the old homestead where they were all raised. And I'll just draw your attention to the road that's passing by the front gate there. That's the main road into the nearby market town of Clare. But the gable, the far side, the gable you can't see, there's another boreen, as we say, a little road going up the mountainside. And the family tell me that the people coming in through the front door would be English speaking, but the people coming down through the back door conveniently down from the mountains would have been Irish speaking. So this was a bilingual household. And but when we're seeing Father Murphy in Philadelphia, when he's in the seminary training to become a priest, we can see here that he's literate. He has literacy in Irish. So an interesting question to figure out how he came about that, because it can be difficult to trace people's education in Ireland in the 19th century. But in any case, here he is in 1888 in Overbrook in Philadelphia, and he's already, this is a song transcribed, and he's submitting it to An Gael, the journal that Michael Logan was publishing in Brooklyn. So you might ask what prompted him to enter the priesthood. There were priests in his family, as we'll see momentarily, but also he gave his own reasoning in that he said, "Go bhfuil me girín scoige ólas," meaning that I might grip knowledge by the throat. So some sense of his personality there, I think. Just here we have to the left an image of the minutes of the Philo-Celtic Society of Philadelphia, of which Father Murphy was a member, and he was the librarian for the society, which probably is unsurprising considering how bookish and interested in manuscript material and the likes that he was. And this booklet, and they don't always survive, but happily this one does among Father Murphy's papers, you will get the membership of this society and their addresses, of course, because they're paying their dues to the society. So it's an opportunity for us to actually map the Irish-speaking community in downtown Philadelphia in that turn of the century period. And we can see here that even within Father Murphy's own parish, 4 blocks away, there is one of the singers that he is transcribing from, and the man there living by Hawthorne Park there on Clymer Street is Thomas O'Clougherty from Lettercala in Connemara, and he sang 40 songs for Father Murphy. So I'm imagining he's one of the parishioners, that church there where Father Murphy was serving at the time, that no longer stands, but that's where he was during the 1890s. But here's just some of the songs. I said I'd give you a glimpse of them. And for those of you who are familiar with Channel songs, some of the songs include An Cushlan Gyor, An Sagratín, Queen of Glas an Oed, An Tail Huach Curti Trahan Wi, and so on. So that's his connection with Philadelphia. But of course, we're talking about the Anthracite region, and I'm guessing that the story is starting to go back another generation again, as recently the family have managed to track down Father Dan's uncle, who was the Reverend Thomas Marin, so his mother's brother. And he's actually identified here on the map from the Atlas of Carbon County from 1875 in Audenried in the Anthracite region. And that's pointing to the newly built church there, which was built in 1873. So it turns out that Father Marin served there for over 30 years, which it must have been quite a challenging life for him, because the lifestyle, of course, of his parishioners there, the challenges they faced every day, but also the terrain. And we just get a glimpse of Father Marin's own character here, where there was a story in the paper about how there was an attempted robbery where he was the victim of it in 1885. And I'll just read out some of it here so you get a sense of the story. It says, while driving along the road last Thursday night, on his way home from Jeansville, the men stopped Father Marin and demanded his money, at the same time placing a revolver at his head and threatening him with death in case he refused. They had mistaken him in the darkness for another person, and when he made known to them who he was, they fled, and the officers did not succeed in learning of their whereabouts until this morning. They were lodged in the Carbon County Jail to await trial. So we're getting a sense that Father Marin, being a significant person in the community, and sure enough, when he died, his funeral was the largest ever witnessed on the south side, according to this newspaper account in 1897. All the collieries were idle, and thousands of people viewed the remains as they lay in state in St. Patrick's Church in Audenried. And a description there of the auxiliary bishop from Philadelphia, Bishop Prendergast, was present, and the priests, numbering over 40 of them, assisting. So I have this vision of 40 priests up on the altar at this funeral mass. And there's more to be found as well about his family links, and Father Murphy clearly must have spent quite a bit of time up visiting with his uncle, because his uncle left his library to Father Murphy in his will. And it'll be interesting to see maybe what influence Father Marin, the uncle, had on Father Murphy in respect of all of his work. So just to give you an idea of some of the locations in the Anthracite region there, it's just some of them because I couldn't fit them all on the map. And I'm also working just with a listing of this collection because it has yet to be catalogued. It's because of its significant size and also the nature of the paper. It's quite brittle, so I tend not to handle it. But just some of them there: Tamaqua, Coaldale, Lansford, Summit Hill, Beaver Meadows, Hazelton there as well. So I thought you might like maybe to see some of the names that are mentioned in the collection. We have here a Mrs. Sheeran in Allentown in Pennsylvania, and she's singing Anthracite Down, which is a very well-known song, still sung today, and there would be many different versions of it around the country. We have also another lady, Mrs. Johnson in Jeddo, and her maiden name is given as Mary Melly from Donegal, and there are different place names given for her. They'll be consolidated in due course, but I've just listed some of them there as Lettermach Awards, Glenfin and Glenties. So another person we have here is Mr. William Judge, and this man is the first one I've been able to trace from Ireland to Pennsylvania and actually pinpoint him on both sides of the Atlantic. I'm still working to connect with his relatives in Erris in Mayo. He is from Powlatomish, near that part of Erris. So he and his family immigrated to Centralia, and then later on, when his children would have settled in Philadelphia, then it looks like the parents actually followed them down to Philadelphia. But the reason I can identify who he is because of a wonderful resource called the Blacksod Bay Assisted Immigration Sailings Database. But if you search for blacksodbayimmigration.ie, you'll find it. And this project, based at Onadiervala in Onachlim on the Mullet Peninsula in Erris in Northwest Mayo, they've done extraordinary work to give all the passenger lists for the sailings that were leaving with the assisted immigration schemes, and then where they're able to decipher some of the information and identify who those families were. That information there is given. So you can see William here emigrating with his wife Sarah and their 5 children. So and then the destination given that they end up in Centralia. So wonderful to be able to start making those connections. One of the songs here that he is singing being Tourniwade, that you can see there. So the most significant singer in the whole collection was living in Audenried. This is Liam O'Donnell, or William O'Donnell, from Ranafast in County Donegal, and he sang over 70 songs. So a star singer, you might say, and he's living, he's a parishioner for Father Marin. So it makes sense that Father Murphy would be staying with his uncle and that he would have the time to spend to transcribe all of those songs, because they weren't short songs, they were long ones. One of them, there's one of the songs I've seen in the collection had 18 or 19 verses in it or something. So extraordinary memories when you consider these people have spent decades in America, and they've carried and retained this practice with them. So just signaling the conviction of that practice. But for Liam, it looks like there's a family network with him there. We know that Ellen O'Donnell is his niece. So I'm trying to piece it together and maybe determine whether Mrs. Hannah Boyle, who's née O'Donnell, is maybe a part of the same family network. They're in Audenried or Yorktown, because of course it's just there's a border really down through that settlement there. But in Audenried, others mentioned, again from Donegal, Ned Diver, Thomas Walsh from Mina Like in Ardra, and then his wife being from Sligo, and she's née Margaret Marin, so possibly a relative of the priest. So some of the other names I have for you, it just turned out that the names that cropped up were all Donegal names from here on, but there are other counties represented in the manuscripts, but just these were the ones I managed to find in advance of today. So in Centreville, we have Dennis Bonner from Arranmore Island, Mrs. Boyle from Big Glen and Glenties, Mrs. John Boyle, née Mary Ann Dernan in Croveche, and a Mrs. Dennis Bonner as well. And in Coaldale, there's Patrick Doherty, Michal Moro Mawla, that'll be O'Malley, from Rani, again Donegal, Peggy Callahan, Mina Churran, Patrick Moore and Mrs. Rogers from Listermac Award, John McHugh from Arranmore Island, and presumably his wife there from near Crawley, and Mrs. Sharp as well. So you'll be recognising some of these surnames, I'm sure. In Hazelton, we've James Kennedy, Lugnaguille, in Glenties is where he's from. And in Beaver Meadows, there's a Morris Stack, and I could be wrong, but you know, that strikes me as quite a Kerry name, but time will tell. We've in Lansford, there's a Patrick Breslin from Rani and Listermac Award. So just to give you a flavour of the presence of these singers, and mostly Donegal people in the Anthracite region there. So also back to Allentown, we had Mrs. Sheeran earlier, but we've two Gallaghers, one from the Rosses and another there from Arranmore Island. And the fact that Arranmore has come up twice shouldn't be surprising, because of course there's a strong link between Arranmore Island, the Anthracite region, and Beaver Island in Lake Michigan, which in the latter part of the 19th century was Irish speaking. There were so many settlers there that they did actually have a sort of a minority, or excuse me, a majority, and for it to be the vernacular in the community. But the demographics shifted then, and that died out. But not before. The folklore associated with those populations and cohorts was documented in the early part of the 20th century by Helen Collar. And we're looking forward to comparing some of these sources to try and help trace the connections and find the different family and community networks moving around across the American continent, and coming from Ireland as well. A later source, maybe from the 1930s onwards, is George Corson's work throughout the Anthracite region, and you'll probably be familiar with that. And also you can go back even further, because we know that there's Irish being spoken there from the 1850s onwards. Certainly, you know, that there's evidence appearing here and there where you'll hear about a priest hearing 500 confessions through Irish in a given location. So an indication there of the density of the numbers of speakers. But here also an indication, maybe the question of class and how they're moving through society, in that it's evidence of American-born, but to Irish parents, but American-born judges, magistrates hearing evidence in court in Irish, so that they have sufficient comprehension to be able to do that, is significant as well. And this lady has nothing to do with the collection, but I liked the image of her sitting on her porch comfortably, and given she's born in the height of the famine there, I imagine she's a contemporary of these singers that we're speaking of. Of course, we also had sort of return migration as well, in that we have the famous fiddle player Neely Boyle, born in Easton in Pennsylvania near Allentown. And of course, his family came back to Donegal. So there's folklore there and family memory in respect of their experience of living in Pennsylvania in a diasporic context. And lately then I've been connecting with locals there familiar with the history and heritage on the ground, so to speak, in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I have Charles McElwee to thank for this story and these images as well. An image of a headstone in, I can't remember which cemetery precisely, but you can see the emblems of mining there on the headstone carved into it: the crowbar, the shovel, the pick, and the fishtail drill. And the family having come up with an appropriate inscription there to reflect his life, down in the mines against my will, the coal king's slave, but now thanks be to God, I am free at last. They're preempting Dr. King's words. But we know that there's memory being maintained in the communities in Pennsylvania today. So for instance, Charles's grandfather here and his fellow veterans on Memorial Day parading through the cemetery, and efforts locally, they're hoping to try and preserve some of this memory and help to enrich the history. So what we'd like to do next is hopefully to digitize this collection. I'm just showing you a slide of the prototype website that was built a number of years ago now. You can probably tell from the design, but just it was a road testing of how to generate a resource that could help shed some light on the cultural lives and musical lives of these Irish speakers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So this collection, the Murphy collection, is arguably the most significant source to emerge in the field of Irish traditional music and poetry and folklore in decades, because of the potential it has, not just to try and map people and as they're moving around, and the cultural mobility that arises as well, as you can see here, maybe for Mrs. Gibbons being in Capacharnon, but ending up in Scranton, now 80 years of age, and she's singing a song about a man that was hanged in the 1798 rebellion, and a man who was a relative of hers. So extraordinary wealth to be tapped in collections like these. But this collection in particular is unique because Father Murphy used he generated a catalogue, or sort of an index of numbers to identify the different songs, because he was generating effectively an epidemiology of song, how the song was moving around and changing as it moved, as one singer might have it and then another. And you can see also the care with which the scholarship is being progressed, in that this table of contents that you see here reflects his 2 typewriters that he had on the go, 2 different coloured ribbon to reflect the Irish and the English entries, with the 2 different scripts as well being used, the 2 different orthographies. And in time, of course, we'd love to hear some of these songs, but we've already had an example of a repatriation project where the material that Micheál O'Gallagher would have collected in Wisconsin, and also recordings that were made laterally with some of his family members in Chicago in the late 1930s. There was a project to repatriate that material back to Mayo, and it was the singers in Erris and musicians there in the locality that recorded this CD of their own music as it had survived amongst their own diaspora. And we shouldn't forget that the diasporas of many countries, but I'll speak for my own and speak of the Irish one, that there are Irish speakers among them today. And not only that, we have Gaeltacht communities even in the diaspora communities. So this lady here was speaking on Irish television a number of years ago, and she was born in Norwood in Massachusetts, and she was speaking of their Irish language practice and their singing practice. As you can see here, she said she sang for 2 hours non-stop, and that music was always a part of their lives. So we're looking forward to having an opportunity sometime in the future to develop this collection into a resource that people can access from anywhere, whether it's Scranton or Swinford, and to do it in such a way that we're taking advantage of the potential of the collection to deliver a depth of knowledge and understanding that really has been beyond us, arguably for a long time, given that we haven't seen a collection like this for these populations before now. And we have, the only other collection in Ireland that might compare with it would be the work of Sam Henry, which would be pretty well known amongst English language song scholars and singers. So for this one, for anybody familiar with Irish traditional instrumental music who would know about Chief O'Neill, Father Murphy is the Chief O'Neill of Shannon song, in a sense, and we'd like to let Shannon, I suppose, have its moment in the extraordinary diasporic story of Ireland. So I very much look forward to your questions now and see what you make of the differences between the Irish and the Welsh music practices in Pennsylvania at the time. And thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Deirdre and Bill. Those were great, great lectures. Really appreciate you taking the time today. So we will open it up for questions. If people want to type a question into the Q&A section, we will go through those. And I can just ask them through. We have the first question. Dr. Jones, where were the Music Hall and Marketplace located in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania?
I wish I knew. I don't, I'm afraid. Sorry. I'm sure, I hope there'll be somebody who's listening who does know.
Maybe like street directories or something like that might
Yeah.
help, even contemporary newspapers as well. Sometimes they might give the address. I know Google Maps has been really useful for me, because if I'd been trying to track down some of these places now, and also sometimes historic maps are being digitized and made available. I know there's a really good one, a resource. There's work done in Philadelphia anyway. I don't know if it reaches as far as Scranton, but yeah, the resources are coming online bit by bit.
Well, great. And then Dr. Deirdre, you mentioned that Sligo was a bilingual community. Was it only Gaelic and English?
Yeah, so County Sligo is sort of in between Mayo and Donegal in a sense, and it would have been Irish. It's you can regard it as being on the west coast of Ireland, and the Irish language, as it was receding throughout the 19th century, it's receding towards the west. So the places where it's still a vernacular, for instance, my own community in the Aran Islands, they're typically right out on the edge. There's a few other Gaeltachtí that are maybe nestled in mountainous communities. So it was the places that were harder to reach. So as I mentioned, Father Murphy was from the Ox Mountains. So it's just that maybe a little bit more remote in a sense, that there were still Irish speakers, native Irish speakers in that area up until the 1950s. And we know that because they were recorded later. There were folklorists and linguists who recorded them. So when I say bilingual in an Irish context, we typically mean Irish and English. Sort of historically, of course, nowadays there are far more languages being spoken in Ireland, but Irish or Gaelic is being taught in our schools since 1904. So everybody has a bit.
Great. So we do have a request, Deirdre, for some singing.
Well, I'm a fiddle player, not so much a singer. We might need to crack open a bottle of whiskey for that. I think we talked about that before, Bill. But you know what, it'd be nice to hear Bill sing in Welsh, actually, seeing as you're missing the choirs.
Your nightmares.
Yeah, my fiddle isn't here at the moment, otherwise I might have played a fiddle tune. But what I can do, I did, when I heard Bill playing musical examples, there are lots of examples of Sean's song on YouTube as well, but you could also go on to the Irish Traditional Music Archive website. I'll put it in the chat, itma.ie. They have loads of resources, and another one is TG Cahed, which is the Irish language TV station, and they have a lot of material that's free to view worldwide on their players, so lots of resources there.
Well, maybe what we can do is if you can both send me the links to the YouTube music, and then I will share them with everybody that participated that signed in today.
Yeah, I can send you for when you put it on YouTube, Bodhi. I can, because they were edited clips that I had. I can send you those if that helps do it. But I did see that there was a question about the links. Quite simply, it's just easier to Google "A Nation Things Sings 5,000 Voices" and it goes to it straight away.
Okay, thanks. So we have a few more questions and comments. So Gerald Williams says, Dr. Jones, I preserved DVDs of your video from 1993.
Oh my God, this is my past coming to revisit me, is it? Is that the TV program, the Welsh language one we did on the Welsh in Scranton, is it? 1993?
be.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you, Jared.
I can see a question there. Somebody is asking if I've come across any music specific to Inishbofin off the coast of County Galway. So I am from the Aran Islands. So there are 4 islands that are, well, offshore islands where you have to get a ferry for some length of time. The 3 Aran Islands and Inishbofin. So that's what they're referring to. And I have lots of friends in Inishbofin, and I've been up there as well. And any community will have music that's specific to it, in that people might have tunes or songs that they've composed, or maybe that they have versions of ones that have been adopted from elsewhere. And I'm working on a project myself. It's Aran songs that John mentioned earlier, and it's a collection of over 50 songs that were composed in the Aran Islands. So that'll give you a sense, because that's a small community, in a relatively isolated. But you pick any community, and they're going to have their own songs. Often it's a local commentary or reportage on things that are happening locally, rather than the big love songs that you'll get in the core Seamus tradition. So a lot of the songs that are in Father Murphy's collection would be those type of songs. So yeah, you'll find Inishbofin. Don't worry, if you want to find it, you'll find it in some of the resources I've mentioned there.
We have a couple more comments. Jared Williams writes, "The Irish of my wife and I are from Castlebar Lough Cullen," if I pronounced that correctly. James Duran writes that he is amazed at the figure of 400,000 speakers of Irish in the US in the late 19th century, but it makes perfect sense. It does typical the contrasting impact of the famine on the Irish language, both in Ireland and the US.
Yeah, the figure as well is, because I looked at a few different resources for that. There's a lot of historians who have worked on the Irish in that period as well, because there being so many as well, and just that post-famine period as well being particularly interesting. And the figure can be disputed. It's a difficult one to trace. In the 1910 census for the US, they did ask people about where they had been born, their nationality, or so. From that, then there's a project that Nicholas Wolfe at NYU used to map the Irish speakers in New York City, which has been fascinating to see. And when you're getting that granular detail, you're starting to get a sense of, some of the stories that Bill and I have been sharing this evening about how communities around language find each other and then celebrate. It's a positive thing in life for them. Sometimes we speak about minoritized languages today, and it's this notion of a receding tide. But when you look at the day-to-day for people living in these communities, it's a force of positivity in their lives. It's giving them strength and joy. And just I'm sure when we hear the music clips that Bill was sharing today in full, that it'll just be undeniable.
And then there was Mr. O'Neill had a follow-up. Would there have been a formal context for the Seamus singing like the eisteddfod?
Yeah, the equivalent in an Irish context is the Oireachtas. And the first Oireachtas was held in 1897, and I think it took its lead, if I have my sequence right, that it took its lead from the eisteddfod in Wales. So, but it wouldn't necessarily have been at the same scale in the diasporic context. What you see are the Philo-Celtic societies are a precursor of the Gaelic League, which was the organization that then gave rise to Anthracite, as we say. So the Philo-Celtic societies are from an earlier period, and they're really the home of these kinds of social gatherings that Bill's description gave a very vivid sense of. We're not getting the same descriptions of those for the Irish language ones. Again, it's that question of literacy And also it's not maybe as spectacular as these enormous events, huge gatherings, choral competitions, etc. It's a more a sort of a more intimate style of singing that wouldn't been able to have to compete maybe on the same kind of stage. So it's about context, really. It's knowing. It's not that the practice is. It's not simply a game of numbers. Just that the practices have different demands in terms of their audience and the numbers of participants as well. So, but it must be said that for a critical mass, for any music practice, that question is there. Well, what is the critical mass? And Irish language practice rarely survived much beyond the second and third generation. If you're finding the Irish language in America today, a lot of the present day speakers, they're not necessarily tracing their roots all the way back to the 19th century. They're going back maybe a generation or two, and that's the reason they have it today. So it's interesting to see just what the challenge is for any minoritized language, how to compete and survive in that new context.
Yeah.
And then, Bill, there was another question for you. Would the Welsh choral singers be accompanied by instruments?
Piano and organ, apart from unaccompanied pieces, but not orchestras. No.
Okay, and then I've got a question for both of you. So what is the status today of traditional music in Wales and Ireland? I know, Bill, you perform with a choir, and we've had several choirs through here, but what is the status of Irish and Welsh music?
There are still choirs of the sort of things that I was talking about, but there's been great changes as well in the style of singing of choirs, and also a big change in the types of repertoire that they sing in terms of more modern music and more active type of singing as well. But of course, there's another strand of Welsh music making, which one is in the shadows in northeast Pennsylvania at this time, which is the folk singing. Yeah. And that is something that is much more of a revival. There is a long tradition of that, much longer than the types of choral singing that we think of, which is in many respects a 19th century sort of invention and development. But there was a constant, I don't know if debate is the right word, there was constant tension between commentators about the way that the fact, if you like, the Welsh obsession with singing hymns and those types of works was clouding out other more native Welsh music, which had survived for generations. And nonconformity sort of pushes those underground a little bit in terms of when it reaches its sort of dominance in the 19th century. And then those have emerged since then.
Well, great. Interesting. And Deirdre?
I was, well, Irish traditional music, the history of it really has changed remarkably during the 20th century, I would say, primarily, because you'll hear of people in the 40s and 50s who talk about having been maybe mocked for carrying a fiddle case down the street or something. It didn't have a presence in any sort of general sense in the country, but that changed hugely. We'll say you had Comhaltas Ceol founded in 1951, then you have music festival events taking off in the 60s, and then the 70s, really the likes of the Willie Clancy Summer School in Clare, and then musicians start to tour as well, and that's connected in with the folk revival, which, I mean, that's in the States, but it's happening more widely than that. So today, I mean, we had St. Patrick's Day, and there was Irish traditional music. There's the relationship with dance as well is significant, post river dance as well. So and also just with the economy in Ireland having changed, it's a very different country. You know, you go back, each generation is completely different country. So I think that with the wealth that has come to the country since throughout the 20th century, I'd say, and the access to education, more people having opportunities to have an instrument, to own one, and then maybe even get formal lessons. So there's been a rise even in formal music transmission, etc. So there's a lot of different elements in that. But I suppose in relation to the Irish language, it would be interesting to see, because actually Irish music has been hugely helpful to the Irish language. I met lots of people that were learning the Irish language in America who told me that Irish music was the reason they decided to learn the language. So I guess that in time, I think, may come to be a crucial relationship between the two. But sometimes seanadh singing that I've been speaking about, because of maybe the richness of the language, maybe people start with simpler songs that might be regarded as children's songs or something. But when we get into the longer, more poetically rich songs, those can be maybe a challenge for learners. So we have some wonderful musicians that are helping people to maybe bridge that gap and to uncover that whole world, because the wealth in the songs is so important to the language, and then it's that reciprocal kind of relationship between them. So we're fortunate to have had the supports in place to support Gaeltacht communities, and also the practices as well to support traditional music, because it wouldn't have had the same networks that maybe other forms of music would have had to support transmission, the institutions and all of that. So it's in some elements, you would say it has a bit of catching up to do, but in general, it's in a rude state of health if we're to go by the numbers of people playing it.
Well, great, thanks. Just a couple more quick questions. Actually, there's several questions. Let me see. So for Bill, is there much evidence of named composers of secular song verse in Welsh in Pennsylvania?
Yes, some of them, like Gwilym Gwent, which I mentioned. Some works by Prother also. What was his name? Mason, as well. Which some of those were secular ones, like the Harve, the Summer, etc. Although these composers also wrote a lot of religious works as well, and hymns.
And then we'll wrap it up with just a quick question. Would it be correct in stating that the Irish and Welsh traditional music are a cappella?
Well, seanadh song is, in the sense, if a cappella means without any accompaniment, then yes, but another distinction would be that it's solo. And then you could, a choral tradition could be a cappella in that it has no accompaniment, but Bill can answer for the Welsh.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say that it was a general rule that it was a cappella. It was some was and some wasn't, because of the traditions of singing with violins and harps, etc. For example, would not be a cappella.
Well, great.
It might depend on whether their instruments were available, Bill, because I'd say for those that were emigrating, it would be a significant choice to bring an instrument with you if you're just carrying a few worldly items with you across the ocean, or even acquiring instruments locally as well, and even repairing them and all those kinds of issues.
Yeah, it depends where you were, but I don't know. I'm just thinking in terms of the or probably the ubiquitous Welsh instrument would have been the piano anyway, and there were plenty of piano manufacturers in the northeast Pennsylvania, plenty of Welsh piano teachers for that matter. So, but I take your point. Yeah, I think this might be right with the case in that whether the relative being slightly well-off Welsh immigrants were emigrating rather than people who were coming from Ireland, particularly during the times of the famine, might have enabled some sort of worldly possessions to be brought with them. I don't know the straight answer.
And it's just maybe another thought that crosses my mind is that with the song tradition, as Moya Cannon's poem said, they're just carrying it with them. It doesn't weigh anything. It's not a physical item that has to be carried. That it can actually I'm getting stuck for the right words now, but that it can transcend, that's the word, can transcend all of those challenges. And it just, I mentioned the church that Father Marin had in Audenried, and you know, William O'Donnell singing 70 songs, and he just living down the street. After Father Marin died, the ground, there was a subsidence near that church, so they had to go and rebuild a church elsewhere. And the story of that just reminded me how just real and inescapable the sense of transience that defined their lives was just augmented in northeastern Pennsylvania in particular, because the ground beneath their feet might shift and change at any moment. So it sort of maybe amplifies the desire for them to actually hold on to the one thing that they could rely on, that wasn't just going to give way, you know, once they had a community around them. So it's just an interesting layer there that's very, very localized for northeastern Pennsylvania.
Well, great. I think this has been a terrific afternoon and evening for our guests and other visitors from Europe. You know, it's amazing this pandemic has been so difficult and so challenging, but some of the bright notes that came out with these unintended consequences of the ability for us to do programs like this with participants with eminent scholars from Ireland and Wales. So we want to thank you both very much for joining us today and participating with us. And I hope that we will see you on your next trips to the US. And if not, then we will expand this technology and do this again. I mean, this has been a very important and really wonderful program. And we did have a request, Deirdre, if you've got upcoming presentations.
I saw that, Bodie, and I should explain that the person who put in that prompt there is a descendant of one of the characters that in the story that I've been telling. So you talked about future opportunities. I'll be giving a longer, more detailed presentation on the collection for the Irish Embassy in the US online again in this format, and it'll be on Thursday the 29th of April. So for any of the descendants of Father Murphy or of Luke Comer and all of these people that are emerging from this story, they'll be welcome to tune in there. But I'll be sharing information about that on social media in advance of that. But yes, that's the date, Thursday, April 29th.
Well, if you would both be so kind, we'd mentioned the email. If you could just send me the links to the music and then anything else that you'd like to share with our group. And since this is our first sort of Eventbrite Zoom collaboration, I'm hoping that I will still have access to the mailing list after the program, and I will send out to everybody, all of our attendees, you know, the links to the music and your upcoming performances. And again, I will add you all to our mailing list, and hopefully we will see Bill and Deirdre in Scranton sometime soon.
That would be wonderful.
Look forward to that.
Great. Well, thank you all again, and I hope everybody has a great afternoon and great evening. And we'll talk to you soon. And come out to the museum starting out April 30th, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the next 2 months. So good night, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Good night. No star.
Yeah.
Iwa.